The darkest prophecy ever spoken about New York may be closer to reality than ever. Buildings glowing with fire, streets swallowed by fear, and crowds running. It is exactly what David Wilkerson described long before he died. In the late 1952, Wilkerson left Pennsylvania and stepped straight into the dangerous heart of New York City, a place ruled by gangs, addiction, and violence. He went there not with a plan or a strategy, but with a simple conviction that God wanted him to reach young people society had already given up on. That step of faith became the beginning of a movement that touched the world. His story is told in the book The Cross and the Switchblade, and decades later, the visions he shared now seem to echo loudly in the world around us. The warning, fall into New York. David Wilkerson's warning about New York came from years of watching a nation slowly drift away from the values that once held it together. He had spent most of his life helping the broken, lifting the hopeless, and guiding young people out of darkness, but he eventually saw something deeper happening. As he traveled and preached, he became a clear and courageous voice, speaking about spiritual decay, moral collapse, and the danger of turning away from God. Wilkerson didn't preach judgment because he wanted to scare people, but because he genuinely feared what would happen if the world refused to wake up. He warned about an economic collapse that would shake the foundations of society, natural disasters that would strike without warning, corruption rising inside churches, and a spiritual darkness that would stretch across nations. At the time, many people brushed him off, some even laughed. They assumed he was exaggerating or reading too much into the events of his day. But now, decades later, the world is starting to look eerily similar to the pictures he painted. In one vision, he found himself standing in a New York City he barely recognized. It was chaos, complete and uncontrollable. Buildings were burning, smoke was rising between skyscrapers, and people were running in every direction, trying to escape what felt like an invisible force pressing against the city. Sirens screamed from every corner, yet nothing seemed to help. What he saw wasn't just physical destruction, it carried a heavy spiritual weight, as if a deep darkness had settled over the city and taken hold of people's hearts. The New York he saw wasn't the world's center of wealth and power that millions admire, it was a broken place. Looting had taken over the streets. Violence erupted without warning. Fires burned uncontrollably. Even the police, normally symbols of order, were overwhelmed and powerless. For Wilkerson, the physical destruction was terrifying, but the spiritual emptiness was even worse. People were running, shouting, panicking, but no one was praying, no one was seeking truth, and churches that were supposed to be beacons of hope had become cold, silent places offering nothing to the frightened hearts around them. What he witnessed in that vision wasn't only about New York, it represented a moral collapse that would eventually spread across the nation, a breakdown of trust, of unity, of spiritual awareness. When he published The Vision in 1973, he put every detail into words, even though he knew people would call him extreme, and they did. Many said it would never happen, that America was too strong, too stable, too protected. But year after year, the world shifted closer to the very things he described. What he saw in that first vision, he insisted, was only the beginning. In Wilkerson's description, the scenes were painfully real, almost like watching a live event with no way to intervene. He saw some of New York's tallest and most iconic buildings swallowed by flames. Windows shattered, debris fell from the sky, and the air was thick with panic. He spoke of blood in the streets, people injured, desperate, calling for help, while others lay motionless as crowds rushed past them. A city known for its speed and indifference was suddenly brought to its knees. Crowds ran wildly, with no direction and no leadership strong enough to calm the chaos. And underneath the physical turmoil, he sensed something far more sinister, a spiritual presence, a darkness hanging over the city like a heavy cloud. He saw government leaders frozen with fear, unable to respond. He saw financial systems starting to collapse, store shelves empty, and people fighting to get even basic necessities. For years, people dismissed his words. But then, September 11 happened. Fire consumed the skyline, smoke darkened the sky, streets filled with fear and chaos. And for those who had read Wilkerson's prophecies, it was a familiar moment. Decades before the tragedy, he had spoken of skyscrapers burning in New York, of an unexpected day when terror and confusion would overwhelm the city. And it happened. Why is New York? When David Wilkerson spoke about New York, he wasn't choosing it at random. In his understanding, the city stood for something far bigger than itself. To him, New York was a mirror, a reflection of the nation's spiritual condition, a place that revealed what was happening deep inside the heart of America. It wasn't just the skyscrapers, the money, or the millions of people packed into its streets. It was what the city represented: power, wealth, independence, and the kind of pride that slowly pushes people away from their need for God. Wilkerson believed New York carried a kind of influence that shaped the entire country. What began there had a way of spreading everywhere else. Culture, entertainment, finance, politics, so much of it flowed out of this one place. If New York shifted, America shifted. And because of that, he saw the city as the first place where spiritual cracks would appear. When the foundation of such a powerful city begins to weaken, the consequences don't stay local. They move outward, touching places far beyond its borders. He compared New York to the role Jerusalem played in the Bible. Jerusalem revealed the spiritual state of God's people. New York, in his eyes, revealed the spiritual state of modern America. And while Jerusalem once called people back to repentance, New York had become a symbol of pride, self-reliance, and moral drift. That's why he said the chaos he saw in his visions wasn't only about New York, it was a warning for the entire nation. The moral collapse, the economic shaking, the fear he described, none of it would stay contained. New York was simply the starting point, the place where the mirror cracked first. And once that mirror breaks, it forces everyone else to face the truth they've been avoiding. Wilkerson wasn't predicting the fall of one city. He was watching the first signs of a nation drifting far from its creator, and he knew that what began in New York was only the beginning. Thing happened inside the church. What broke his heart the most was what he believed would happen inside the church itself. He said the Holy Spirit showed him a future where spiritual leaders would begin to drift away from truth, not in an instant, but slowly, quietly, and almost unnoticed. Wilkerson spoke about a time when pastors would avoid preaching about sin or repentance because those messages made people uncomfortable. Instead of confronting spiritual decay, they would choose messages that kept everyone smiling, feeling motivated, and coming back each week. Sermons would turn into feel-good talks. The cross would be mentioned less and less. Holiness would be replaced by entertainment, and the fear of God, the kind of reverence that brings real transformation, would start disappearing from the sanctuary. He warned that some leaders would begin living double lives, preaching righteousness in public while privately walking in greed, pride, or immorality. Churches would shift their focus from saving souls to building brands, from humility to influence, from compassion to competition. He called this a great falling away from truth, a slow erosion that few would notice until the damage was already done. This vision broke Wilkerson's heart because he deeply loved the church. He believed in its purpose, its mission, and its calling. Yet he also believed that God would allow judgment to begin in his own house, not to destroy the church, but to purify it. Hidden sin would be exposed. False teachings would be uncovered. And through the shaking, a true revival would rise. As the years passed, many began to recognize the signs he spoke of. Scandals emerging in churches once thought untouchable, leaders falling into sin, congregations feeling confused or betrayed, all of it echoing the warnings he gave. The pulpit, which was meant to be a place of light and clarity, had in some cases become a source of compromise. Wilkerson also warned that this decline wouldn't happen violently, it would begin quietly. But the part he feared the most was not the persecution itself. It was the silence of believers who knew the truth but chose not to speak. A generation that understood what was right but stayed quiet to avoid trouble. That silence, he said, would be the real tragedy. Yet even in this sobering vision, Wilkerson never lost hope. He said, "The persecution is not the end. It is the test that separates those who merely believe from those who truly belong to God." The collapse of morality. When David Wilkerson spoke about the collapse of morality, he wasn't exaggerating or trying to create fear. He said he saw a time coming when sin would no longer hide in the shadows. Instead of being something people were ashamed of, it would be openly celebrated. Bad behaviors would be applauded. The most troubling part, he said, was not the sin itself, but the loss of conviction, a nation whose conscience had gone completely numb. In his vision, addiction was no longer limited to dark alleys or struggling neighborhoods. It spread everywhere, in suburbs, in schools, and even among people with successful careers. Violence would become something people expected rather than something that shocked them. Gangs would grow, anger would fester in young hearts, and many would drown their pain in substances or reckless behavior. Police would be overwhelmed, and families would feel helpless. The cries for help would echo through communities, but society would be too numb, too distracted, or too divided to respond. Wilkerson warned of a deeper spiritual sickness spreading through immorality. He spoke of a time when confusion about identity, sexuality, and purpose would become widespread. Children would be exposed to ideas and images far beyond what their minds could handle. Entertainment, once lighthearted and meaningful, would become darker and more disturbing, reflecting the emptiness that had settled into people's hearts. He warned that the family, the foundation of society, would start to weaken. Marriage would lose its meaning. Respect between generations would fade. Parents would feel powerless as cultural voices grew louder than their own. Neighborhoods that once felt safe and warm would turn into places marked by fear, distrust, and loneliness. To Wilkerson, this collapse of morality wasn't just a sign that judgment was coming, it was the judgment. When right and wrong become blurred, when evil is celebrated and good is mocked, society is already experiencing the consequences of drifting away from God. Yet he also believed that even in this darkness, there would be people who refused to give in, people who held on to truth, lived with integrity, and shined like small but powerful lights in a world that desperately needed hope. The collapse didn't stop there. In the years that followed, the very patterns he talked about began spreading through New York and then across many other cities. Riots erupted. Violence in the streets became a regular headline. Economic uncertainty tightened its grip. And little by little, society seemed to grow colder, almost numb. Even the church, the one place people once ran to for strength and clarity, began to change. Pulpits that were once filled with fire, conviction, and truth started to quiet down. Messages that called people back to repentance were replaced with soft, comfortable talks about blessings and prosperity. It was exactly what Wilkerson feared, not an attack from the outside, but a quiet replacement of truth with convenience. Then came the COVID-19 pandemic, and suddenly his warnings about a global shaking didn't feel distant anymore. Empty shelves, global panic, cities shutting down, churches locked, families separated. It was a moment where the whole world felt fragile. Even though Wilkerson never mentioned a virus, his words about a worldwide disruption touching every part of life sounded painfully familiar. People were isolated, anxious, and spiritually starving. And what used to be dismissed as extreme now feels like a mirror reflecting back at us. His prophecies were not wild guesses. They were years ahead of their time. In the vision, written in 1973, he talked about rising crime, economic instability, chaotic weather, and even growing pressure against churches. Back then, it sounded more like a movie script than something that could ever happen. But today, decades later, we're watching those very things play out right in front of us. Cities burn during riots. Economies collapse in a single night. Families struggle to afford basic needs. Truth is twisted. Faith is mocked. And in many places, churches stay quiet when people need courage the most. That's why many have started revisiting his words. When the storms he described begin to form, even the most skeptical hearts start asking a simple question: what if he was right all along? Among the warnings Wilkerson shared, one stood out more than anything else: the sudden collapse of the economy. He didn't describe a slow, predictable decline. He spoke of something sharp and unexpected, almost like the floor dropping out from underneath society. Banks failing, businesses shutting down overnight, stock markets spinning out of control. People lining up at banks, only to find there was nothing left to withdraw. The financial structures the world depended on would crumble faster than anyone imagined. This vision wasn't directed at wealthy investors or Wall Street analysts. It was meant for ordinary families, people who worked hard, saved faithfully, and believed their financial security would always protect them. He saw confusion and fear on people's faces as the value of everything they built seemed to disappear in a moment. But the heart of his message was deeper than economics. He believed society had built its foundation on money instead of God, and when money becomes a god, its collapse becomes a spiritual wake-up call. And today, we can already see glimpses of what he described. Financial crises shaking nations, sudden market crashes, banks closing their doors, inflation rising around the world, and everyday people struggling just to afford basic things like food, gas, or rent. These are no longer distant warnings. They have become part of our daily conversations. Yet Wilkerson said the most dramatic collapse would come when people felt safest during a time of peace, when things seemed to be improving. That collapse, he said, would not come to destroy people, but to shake them awake, reminding them that real security does not come from a paycheck or a savings account. It comes from a faith strong enough to stand firm when the entire system falls apart. Technology will control the world. David Wilkerson spoke about technology long before it became what we know today, yet his warning feels surprisingly close to the world we're living in now. He lived in a time when digital tools were just beginning to grow, but even then, he sensed a future where technology wouldn't simply make life easier, it would shape the way people lived, acted, and even believed. He talked about a world increasingly dependent on digital systems, not just for convenience, but for basic survival. And the more we look around today, the more we realize how accurate that concern was. He described a time when technology would shift from serving people's needs to quietly controlling them. Back then, he didn't use words like smartphones, AI, or digital surveillance, but his message pointed in that direction. He saw a digital web forming a system capable of tracking what we buy, where we go, and what we support. He warned about financial systems tied to digital platforms that could easily be turned on or off, depending on whether someone fit the expectations of those in power. It wasn't just about information, it was about influence, control, and the ability to silence anyone who didn't align with the culture or beliefs of the moment. Wilkerson also mentioned the idea of a unified system long before the world ever talked about digital IDs or fully cashless societies. Today, we see glimpses of exactly what he described. Identification tied to digital profiles, purchases made with a tap or a scan, and algorithms deciding what people can see or say. Opportunities are increasingly connected to online identities, and behind all of it is a growing pressure to follow the crowd. For those who hold on to biblical values or simply think differently, the space to speak freely keeps shrinking. One thing he emphasized was that this kind of control wouldn't arrive with chains or forced commands. Instead, it would come wrapped in convenience. People would hand over their privacy little by little, believing it was harmless, a faster way to pay, an easier way to travel, a more efficient way to live. But step by step, without even noticing, society would walk into a system that could eventually tighten around anyone who tried to resist. And once that system was fully in place, escaping it wouldn't be easy. It would require courage, clarity, and a faith strong enough to stand against pressure. Wilkerson wasn't telling people to reject technology altogether. His message was about awareness, understanding that, behind the screens and the systems, there could be a deeper push, shaping the world toward a place where faith, freedom, and truth are quietly filtered out. His warning was simple: stay awake, because the moment we stop paying attention is the moment control, no longer looks like control, it looks like comfort. The power of hope. Even when David Wilkerson described the darkest parts of his visions, he never left people without a place to stand. Hope was always there, woven into every warning. He believed with all his heart that God would always preserve a remnant, a group of men and women who refuse to compromise, who refuse to bow to pressure, and who rise when everything else crumbles. And he didn't picture them as superheroes, but as ordinary people strengthened by a God who still moves in the middle of chaos. Wilkerson saw a coming wave of believers who weren't known, celebrated, or admired. Many of them would be people the world overlooked, the quiet ones, the broken ones, the ones who thought God could never use them again. But in his vision, these people would suddenly come alive with faith. They would walk with boldness, love deeply, serve quietly, and stand unshaken while everything around them trembled. They wouldn't need a stage or a spotlight. Their strength would come from the Holy Spirit, not from human attention. He also believed that real revival wouldn't arrive through big productions or emotional events. It would begin privately, in living rooms, in small gatherings, in humble churches, where people returned to God with honest hearts. He spoke of a cleansing within the church, a return to holiness and truth, a hunger for God that entertainment couldn't satisfy. These believers wouldn't run from the storm. They would walk straight into it, carrying light, lifting up the broken, praying for the lost, and speaking truth with love. Some of them, he said, would be people who once lived far from God, former addicts, former criminals, people society had written off, but who were now transformed and burning with compassion. And then Wilkerson shared one of his most unsettling images, something he described as a dark presence falling from the sky. It wasn't a natural disaster or a physical storm. It was something spiritual, something heavy, something that settled over hearts. He spoke of a wave of darkness descending on nations like an unseen mist, tightening its grip slowly until people no longer felt conviction. Hearts would grow numb, truth would sound offensive. And instead of turning to God, society would chase man-made solutions, politics, technology, even deceptive forms of religion, hoping they could fill the emptiness. But none of those answers would work. They would only deepen the void. He also mentioned strange signs in the heavens, disturbances that would confuse scientists and unsettle leaders. He didn't give specifics, but he said clearly that when the sky begins to change and the world pauses in fear, it's not a moment to panic, it's a call to pray. Wilkerson believed that God always warns before judgment, and these signs were meant to shake people awake, not to crush them. He often spoke about another kind of darkness, the silence of leaders. Both political and religious voices would grow quiet at a time when truth was desperately needed. It wasn't the silence of confusion, but the silence of refusal. Leaders would choose convenience over truth, popularity over responsibility. And while the world trembled, many pulpits would avoid speaking about repentance, holiness, or spiritual warfare. That silence, he said, would be one of the greatest dangers of all. During the final years of his life, Wilkerson's public voice became softer, but his message grew more urgent. He shifted from warning nations to preparing believers. What mattered most was not predicting events, but preparing hearts. He urged people to return to prayer, to holiness, to a faith that could stand when the world shook. What burdened him wasn't buildings, crowds, or programs, it was the condition of the heart. He pleaded with believers to stop treating faith as a casual thing, to turn off distractions, to weep again, to believe again, to walk closely with God while there was still time. In one of his final messages, he said words that stayed with everyone who heard them. God is calling us to die to self, to stand in the storm, to trust Him even when the foundations shake. It wasn't a message about survival, it was a message about surrender, a surrender that produces strength no crisis can break. When David Wilkerson passed away in a car accident in 2011, many were heartbroken. But those who followed his ministry knew that he had already given his final plea. He had passed the torch. And now, the real question wasn't, what will happen next, but what will we do with what we've heard? Because in the end, Wilkerson didn't leave behind a message of fear. He left behind a call to awaken, a call to return, a call to stand firm in a world that desperately needs people who still carry the light of God. Not only David Wilkerson, but Edgar Cayce also warned us a year of awakening and transformation. The Awakening Year. Edgar Cayce earned his most famous moniker, the Sleeping Prophet, because of his purported ability to fall asleep atop books, awakening with full retention of the facts and illustrations recorded therein. Later, this skill transformed into the ability to diagnose and recommend treatments for illnesses while in a trance-like sleeping state. Cayce foresaw some intriguing possibilities for 2026 that just might come to pass. While skeptics dismiss many of Cayce's prophecies, his supporters point to the accuracy of some of his predictions from decades past. The future is hard to predict, but Cayce's visions for 2026 give us plenty of food for thought about what may be in store just a few short years from now. The year 2026, according to Cayce, marks a pivotal moment in human history. It's described as an epoch where a collective awakening occurs the world. He believed that by 2026, humanity would experience a significant spiritual awakening, leading to a deeper connection with our inner selves and a greater awareness of our interconnectedness with all living beings. This prediction resonates with the increasing interest in mindfulness, meditation, and holistic well-being practices in our modern society. As scientific and technological advancements have dominated our collective focus, many have found themselves feeling increasingly disconnected from a sense of meaning and purpose in their lives. That is what Edgar Cayce saw long ago, and he believed that 2026 is the perfect time for everyone to awaken. We all need to seek out ways to reconnect with their inner selves and find greater fulfillment in life. Edgar Cayce also spoke about the awakening that people must experience after leaving this world. He told, "After death, we may enter a region that is void of love, life, and light, void of everything. For some, this region is approximately their wish come true. Here, they are truly alone with themselves. For some souls, this is a pain that is unbearable. In the absence of truth, love, gentleness, and kindness, some souls fill the void with an irrational and unbelievable amount of pain and fear. It is so dark in the realm of outer darkness that the darkness hurts and panic grips them without knowing why. There are various degrees of darkness to this realm, and it is darker and denser at the center than at its outer fringes. The closer we are to the outer edges, the more interaction there is with others in the realm. The closer to the center, the darker and more painful is the solitude. Those who find themselves in outer darkness cannot travel across this dimension. They must grow through the levels of this realm. After death, one may find themselves in a particular degree of darkness that most closely corresponds to the degree of the absence of love in one's life. Outer darkness is not a punishment. It is a region which operates lawfully for the benefit of those who are there. This region is not a realm which was created for any soul to experience, but one which came about as a consequence of the negative activity of souls in creation. So great has been the desire for self, so monumental across time and space has been the selfishness of some of God's creatures, that this realm is the creation or manifestation of their own collective activities. Outer darkness, and the reality with which it is associated, were created and are held in place by collective self-interest. Thing happens during the spiritual awakening process. Spiritual awakening is something you will almost certainly experience this year. Therefore, Edgar Cayce encourages all of us to prepare for this event by understanding what will happen during this process. Stage 1. The dark night of the soul. What's a spiritual awakening? Again, it's a process that involves different stages, including the phase known as the dark night of the soul, where individuals may experience intense inner turmoil, despair, confusion, and a sense of loss of meaning and purpose. Symptoms of spiritual ascension can include questioning one's beliefs, values, and identity, which may lead to a deeper understanding of oneself and their connection to the universe. This transformative process, which includes stages such as the dark night of the soul, can be triggered by significant life events, such as the loss of a loved one, a major life change, or a spiritual crisis. Signs that you may be experiencing the dark night of the soul include feeling lost or disconnected from yourself and others, questioning your beliefs and values, experiencing a sense of purposelessness or nihilism, feeling intense emotional pain, anxiety, or depression, struggling with addiction or destructive behavior, feeling a sense of spiritual emptiness or disconnection. Stage 2. The awakening. The awakening is a stage in spiritual awakening where an individual begins to experience a profound shift in consciousness and awareness. It is a time of self-discovery, where one may feel a sense of connection to something greater than themselves. This stage can be triggered by a spiritual experience, a deepening of one's spiritual practice, or a newfound sense of purpose and direction. As you navigate the awakening stage, you may experience a stronger sense of intuitive guidance that can lead you towards spiritual experiences and a deeper understanding of your purpose. Signs that you may be experiencing the awakening include feeling a sense of inner peace, joy, or bliss, experiencing synchronicities or meaningful coincidences, feeling a connection to nature or a higher power, becoming more compassionate and empathetic toward others, feeling a sense of purpose or calling, having intuitive insights or psychic abilities. Stage 3. The integration. Integration is a stage in spiritual awakening where an individual begins to integrate their new insights and experiences into their everyday life. It is a time of balance and integration, where one may feel a sense of inner harmony and coherence. This stage can be triggered by a desire to live a more authentic and purposeful life, or by a need to align one's values and beliefs with their actions and behaviors. Signs that you may be experiencing the integration include feeling a sense of inner balance and harmony, being more mindful and present in your daily life, aligning your actions and behaviors with your values and beliefs, feeling a sense of empowerment and self-confidence, cultivating healthy relationships and connections with others, living a more authentic and purposeful life. Stage 4. The expansion. The expansion is a stage in spiritual awakening where an individual begins to experience a deeper sense of connection to the universe and all living beings. It is a time of transcendence, where one may feel a sense of unity, consciousness, and interconnectedness with all things. This stage can be triggered by a deepening of one's spiritual practice, a desire for personal growth and transformation, or a sense of spiritual mission or calling. Signs that you may be experiencing the expansion include experiencing a sense of oneness with the universe, having profound spiritual experiences or insights, feeling a sense of awe and wonder about the mysteries of existence, developing a heightened sense of intuition and psychic abilities, feeling called to serve and make a positive impact on the world. Stage 5. The transcendence. The transcendence is a stage in the spiritual path of awakening, where an individual transcends the limitations of the ego and experiences a sense of unity with the divine. It is a time of ultimate transformation, where one may feel a sense of enlightenment or spiritual liberation. This stage can be triggered by a profound spiritual experience, a deepening of one's spiritual practice, or a sense of completion or fulfillment of one's spiritual path. Signs that you may be experiencing the transcendent stage include feeling a sense of oneness with the divine, transcending the limitations of the ego, and experiencing a sense of unity consciousness, feeling an expansion of your spiritual life, a sense of enlightenment or spiritual liberation, experiencing a deep sense of inner peace and contentment, letting go of attachment to the material world, feeling complete or fulfilled in your spiritual journey. After reaching the transcendent stage of spiritual awakening, many individuals may wonder what to do next. It's important to remember that spiritual awakening is an ongoing process, and the journey doesn't end with the attainment of enlightenment or spiritual liberation. In fact, the transcendent stage is often just the beginning of a new phase of spiritual growth and development. Some suggestions for what to do after spiritual awakening include continuing to deepen your spiritual practice, serving others, and living a life aligned with your newfound insights and values. key signs of spiritual awakening, and if you have these signs, might be you are experiencing a spiritual awakening. One of the first signs of spiritual awakening is heightened intuition. Intuition is often described as an inner knowing, a subtle voice or feeling that guides us without conscious reasoning. Imagine moments when you suddenly just know the right path to take, or when you understand something without needing to analyze it. These instances become more frequent and pronounced. You might make decisions based on a feeling or a hunch, which often are remarkably accurate and beneficial. This heightened intuition keeps you in tune with your inner voice, which speaks from your true self, free from overthinking and external influences. The noise of everyday life dims, allowing you to hear the wisdom inside you all along. As you experience this shift, your intuition becomes a source of creativity and inspiration. You may discover new solutions to problems or feel inspired to take paths you hadn't considered before. Trusting this inner guidance can be empowering, leading to a deeper understanding of yourself and your purpose. Increased empathy and compassion is the second sign. You may gain a deeper empathy and compassion as you journey through a spiritual awakening. Suddenly, the boundaries between your emotions and those of others might seem blurred, allowing you to feel what they feel with a heightened sense of understanding and sensitivity. You might genuinely experience the ebbs and flows of emotions that others are going through. This increased empathy can extend to all living beings, people, animals, and the environment. You become more at one with the subtle expressions of nature and the silent voices of animals, sensing their unspoken stories and needs. Alongside empathy, your compassion also grows. This might manifest in small acts of kindness, like offering a listening ear to a friend or helping a stranger in need. Or it could inspire more significant changes in your life, such as volunteering for causes you care about or making lifestyle choices that are more considerate of the planet and its population. This increase in empathy and compassion is a sign of your heart opening and your consciousness expanding. You start to see the interconnectedness of all life, recognizing that the well-being of others directly impacts your own. As enriching as this heightened empathy and compassion can be, looking after yourself is important. Being deeply attuned to the emotions of others can feel overwhelming at times. Setting healthy emotional boundaries helps you maintain your emotional well-being. The next sign that you need to focus on is desire for meaningful connections. A key aspect of experiencing a spiritual awakening is the desire for deeper, more meaningful connections in your life. This shift often begins as a growing dissatisfaction with superficial interactions and a hunger for relationships that offer genuine depth and authenticity. You may find yourself longing for conversations beyond the mundane, seeking to connect on a level that nourishes your soul and aligns with your newfound understanding of the world. As you embark on this journey, the nature of your relationships may begin to change. You might gravitate towards people who share your values and perspectives or challenge you to grow and think in new ways. You might seek out those who understand and respect your journey in your friendships, offering support and wisdom. In romantic relationships, you may desire a partner who supports and participates in your spiritual growth. Even in professional settings, you might find yourself drawn to work that feels more aligned with your values and allows for authentic expression. This shift can also mean letting go of relationships that no longer serve your growth. Recognizing that some connections might hinder your journey is an essential part of this process. It's about finding balance and ensuring that your social circle reflects and supports your spiritual path.